Hey, real quick before the video gets started, I designed this shirt. If you're interested in picking up one in large, extra large, or 2XL, check for the link in the description below. On to the video. Welcome back to another Tech Junkie video. Today we're going to be replacing the screen on a Moto G Stylus. I'd never heard of this phone before, and it had been quite a while since I worked on anything Motorola. Motorola devices have a tendency to be more difficult than your standard Samsung devices and Apple devices, but this one wasn't too bad. Once you get the back glass off, which proved a little more difficult than I was used to, you run into Torx Bit 3 screws. Most phones that I come in contact with have Phillips screws, and then your Apple has your tri-wing screws. Don't see Torx Bit screws very often at all. I had to dig deep to find a screwdriver for this one. Luckily, I had an old screwdriver set at my desk and was able to knock this out. But yeah, you have to use Torx Bit size 3 for this device. There are about 15 screws, top and bottom. We start out by removing the top screws and removing the top plastic, pulling the fingerprint scanner away from the body of the phone, and then we can move on to disconnecting the battery. The battery connector is underneath all of this black tape. The tape may be overkill. These connectors are firmly in place, but you have to pull that black tape away from the body of the phone, and then you can disconnect your battery. There are two more connectors here that you want to disconnect. One is to the charge port and one is to the screen. All three cameras are independent components. You could disconnect each camera and then it pops off independently. Most smartphones that I've come into contact with, the three camera assembly are all one assembly, but all three of these cameras are individual components, which means if one of the camera components goes bad, you can replace just one component without having to replace the entire assembly. So that's actually a good thing. Before you remove your board, there is a screw right here. It's not exactly hidden, but I did miss it to begin with. Once you remove that screw, the board just pops right out. It's a fairly simple process. With a little bit of heat and alcohol, the vibrate motor comes out and the ear speaker motor comes out. That's notable to me because in my experience with Motorola devices, the ear speaker is almost always impossible to pull out of the phone without messing it up, at least in my experience. This one came right out, and then we can turn our attention to the remainder of the Torx Bit screws down at the bottom of the phone. Once you pull out all of those screws, you can access the charge port, which is tucked underneath this plastic bracket. The plastic bracket also houses the loudspeaker. It comes out fairly easily. There is a little bit of adhesive underneath it, seemed like, but it came out fairly simple. You're going to have some antenna cables connected to the charge port, and then of course there's a connector down there underneath the battery as well. This battery was not easy to come out. I had to use a lot of heat and I had to use a lot of alcohol, but eventually it did come out. One of these cable connectors down at the bottom, you do have to transfer over to the new screen, so make sure you pull that away. And now we've got this this Moto G Stylus completely disassembled. Before you put your charge port back in, it's easier if you go ahead and connect that ribbon cable back to the underside of the charge port. If you try to put the cable in first and then put the charge port down on top of it, it's hard to get a good connection. So I connected it before I put it down into the phone. Then you want to make sure your antenna cables are tucked into place, connected to the charge port, and fed up along the right side of the screen. It's easier to do it now than to do it later when all of your other components are back in place. There's a little ridge along the right side of the screen for you to be able to feed those antenna cables in. That keeps them out of the way. You do want to make sure that they're fed into this little gap. If they're not fed into the gap, they can cause trouble with putting the back glass back onto the phone. They'll stick out and it'll cause your back glass not to sit flat. Once you've got your charge port transferred over and your cables are tucked into their little area, you can put your loudspeaker and plastic bracket back on and replace the Torx Bit screws to secure your charge port in place. And half of the reassembly process is done at this point. Now we can move on to replacing the Now we can move on to replacing the ear speaker back to where it goes on the top of the screen, and you want to also put your vibrate motor in place as well. It's a small vibrate motor compared to some of the other ones I've seen in today's smartphones, but it worked fine. Now we can put our board back in place. Just lift those antennas up just enough to get your board in place. Once your board is seated properly, you can go ahead and connect those antennas, or you can save it for later. It's easier just to go ahead and connect them then. But whichever method you prefer, just as long as they're done before you put the plastic cover back over your board. Once you get that done, you can go ahead and snap your LCD connector to your board. That's the first step, and then your charge port connector can come next. I'm seeing a lot more of these extension cables that run from the top of the board to the bottom of the phone. Didn't used to be that way, but now we're seeing it a lot more with these double stack boards. Once you get those connectors snapped into place and everything is firm and secure, you can put your battery back in. And put this one standoff screw, Torx bit screw that holds your board down. You can go ahead and screw it in place to make sure your board is secure. Now wait until your board is flat and in place before you put the screw in. You don't want to force your board to bend or anything like that. And make sure your battery is snug. And then you can pop your 3 cameras back into place, connecting each one on the board one at a time. Now that you got your cameras in place, you can go ahead and put your fingerprint scanner back in position. You want to make sure that you keep your battery disconnected until you get all of your connectors in place. The battery should be the last thing that you connect once you get your phone in the reassembly process. This home button was a little unusual for it to just flap around until you put your back glass back on, but it's not going anywhere. With that in place, you can put your plastic connector back on top of your board. This secures your board in place and protects it from impact. Just take all of your Torx bit screws and put them all back in place to secure that bracket. Make sure your antenna cables are tucked off to the side and put in place. Once you put your Torx bit screws back in, your phone is ready for the back glass to be put back into place. Now all of the Torx bit screws are the same size, so you don't have to worry about putting in a screw into the wrong hole. As most Samsung phones are also use the same size screws. This Motorola did as well. With Apple, a lot of their screws are different shapes and sizes, so you have to be more careful with where you put a screw. But these Motorola screws, these Torx bit screws, were all the same size, so no worries about putting one in the wrong place. Last screw there. I had a lot of problems with these antenna cables repeatedly popping out of that little gap in the side of the phone, so I had to put them back in place several times. Finally got it in there, but it was a pain in the butt to get them in place. Before you put your back glass on, it's always a good practice to turn your phone on, make sure it has a full function. It's just a pain to put your adhesive on your back glass and then re-adhere your back glass, and then something go wrong, something's not connected, and then you have to undo it all. So turn your phone on and check it out first. The adhesive that was on this device was really thick, and I had to peel it all the way off in order to get the back glass off. So I had to put new adhesive on the glass. I use 3M double-sided tape for pretty much all back glass replacements, unless it's an iPhone. It's super sturdy. I don't have any issues with it falling off or anything like that. So I use some 3M double-sided adhesive here, and then we can snap our back glass in place. Once we get the back glass in place, that's pretty much it for the repair. Some further testing, and then clean the phone up. Put the SIM card tray back in and clean the phone up. A lot of fingerprints happen during the repair process, and with COVID and everything else, you don't want to give your customer back a dirty phone. So once I finish doing all my repairs, I wipe my phones down with alcohol wipes. I purchased these at Walmart. They're about $6 a box, and this is not a paid product placement. These are actually designed to clean eyeglasses, and I found that they leave less streaks on your cell phone screen than wipes that are actually designed for cell phones. I think the alcohol does a better job of cleaning dirt and fingerprints and oil from your skin on these cell phones. So I use these alcohol wipes. That's it for the Motorola G Stylus. If you found this video informative or you like watching these repairs, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. We upload almost every day. I appreciate you watching. Make sure you hit that bell, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks again.